I'm Alexandra, 32 years old, and as I walked into my younger sister Samantha's wedding reception alone, I felt every judgmental eye in the room. The whispers started immediately. Timothy's wealthy family stared at me like I was an alien species, their disapproving glances following my every step. After 2 years abroad working in conflict zones, I'd forgotten how cruel high society could be. One distinguished older gentleman watched me with unusual intensity. I never imagined that within hours, this same man would stand up, face me directly, and change everything with a single, respectful bow. If you want to know what happened next, and why this moment changed everything, let me know where you're watching from, and subscribe to hear more stories about unexpected moments of vindication. For the past 7 years, I've worked as a humanitarian aid worker with International Relief Alliance, specializing in emergency medical coordination in conflict zones. While most of my college friends were climbing corporate ladders and starting families, I was setting up field hospitals in places most Americans couldn't locate on a map. My life consists of temporary housing, emergency evacuations, and the constant challenge of helping refugees and war victims with limited resources. The satisfaction I find in this work is immeasurable, but my family has never fully understood my choices. My sister Samantha, 3 years younger, took the traditional path our parents always envisioned for both of us. She completed her business degree, landed a marketing position at a prestigious firm, and dated appropriate men from good families. When she met Timothy Blackwell, whose family owns one of the largest private banking empires on the East Coast, my parents were ecstatic. I received the wedding invitation while coordinating relief efforts after a major earthquake. The timing couldn't have been worse. We were critically understaffed, and leaving meant abandoning people who desperately needed help. But after missing multiple family events over the years, I knew skipping my only sister's wedding wasn't an option. I arranged for a temporary replacement and flew back to the States just 1 week before the wedding. My homecoming was bittersweet. Mom hugged me tightly with tears in her eyes, while simultaneously commenting on my weight loss and sun-damaged skin. Alexandra, couldn't you have come home sooner? We could have fixed you up with a nice spa day. And now there's no time to find you a proper date for the wedding. I don't need a date, Mom, I replied, setting down my worn backpack in my childhood bedroom, now converted to a home office with just a daybed in the corner. I'm perfectly capable of attending a wedding alone. My mother, Evelyn, sighed dramatically. But everyone will be paired up. Timothy's family is very traditional. What will they think? They'll think I'm a grown woman who doesn't need a man on her arm to validate her existence, I said, though I knew my mother's concerns weren't entirely unfounded. From the few interactions I'd had with Timothy's family, I understood they valued appearances above all else. The next day involved a frantic shopping trip for an appropriate dress. My mother vetoed my first 5 choices for being too plain or not flattering enough. What she really meant was they didn't hide the long scar on my right arm from a building collapse in Sudan, or make me look conventionally attractive by American standards. This navy one is perfect, I insisted, selecting a simple but elegant dress with 3/4 sleeves. It's comfortable and appropriate. But it doesn't emphasize your figure, Mom protested. You could look so beautiful if you tried, Alexandra. Those words stung more than she knew. The implication that I didn't try to be beautiful, as if my value diminished because I prioritized function over fashion in my daily life. That evening, I overheard a phone conversation between Samantha and Timothy that confirmed my worst fears about the upcoming wedding. Yes, she's finally here, Samantha was saying in hushed tones from the kitchen. I know. She looks, well, you know how she is. Mom's trying to help with her appearance, but... A pause. No, she didn't bring anyone. Honestly, Tim, I just hope she doesn't say anything controversial to your parents. You know how passionate she gets about her causes. I slipped away before hearing Timothy's response, my chest tight with hurt. I'd always supported Samantha unconditionally. Why couldn't she do the same for me? That night, I seriously considered not attending. I could invent an emergency, return to my team where I was genuinely needed and respected. But running away wouldn't solve anything. Plus, Despite our differences, I loved my sister and wanted to share her important day. My father, David, found me sitting on the back porch late that night, staring at the stars that were barely visible through the suburban light pollution. "Can't sleep?" he asked, joining me with 2 mugs of hot chocolate, just like when we were kids.
Just jet lag. Elite.
And nothing to do with the country club wedding you're about to attend with people who measure success in stock portfolios rather than lives saved? His gentle smile took any sting from his words. I laughed softly. Am I that transparent? Only to me. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders. Your mother and sister, they love you, but they don't understand you. Never have. But I do. Do you, Dad? I asked, genuinely curious. He'd never stood in my way, but he'd never explicitly supported my unconventional choices either. More than you know. Remember my buddy Frank from college? His son was working in Haiti after the earthquake. Said an American medical coordinator saved his entire team when riots broke out. Described a fierce woman who created a safe corridor through impossible circumstances. He looked at me knowingly. Sounded an awful lot like my daughter. Tears pricked my eyes. You never told me. Figured you didn't do it for the recognition. He squeezed my shoulder. Go to this wedding. Be yourself. The people who matter will see your worth. The night before the wedding, while everyone else attended the rehearsal dinner, to which I wasn't invited, conveniently blamed on limited space, I sat cross-legged on my temporary bed, scrolling through photos on my phone. Children smiling despite missing limbs. Elderly refugees finding moments of joy in camps. Colleagues working 36-hour shifts during crisis. These images grounded me, reminding me why I chose this path. The morning of the wedding arrived with chaos. My family had left early to help Samantha prepare, leaving me to get ready alone. I applied minimal makeup, styled my short practical haircut as best I could, and slipped into my navy dress. Looking in the mirror, I saw 2 versions of myself, the polished American wedding guest my family wanted and the dedicated humanitarian worker I'd become. Today, somehow, I needed to reconcile these identities. With no family car available, I called an Uber to take me to the Blackwood Country Club, an exclusive venue that reportedly cost more than my annual project budget. The driver whistled as we approached the sprawling grounds. Some fancy event, huh? Never been past the gates myself. A wedding, I replied, stomach nodding as I stared at the manicured perfection of the place. My sister's marrying into the family that owns it. Well, ain't that something? He said, clearly impressed. Guess that makes you practically royalty too. I smiled weakly, thinking how far from royalty I felt as the car approached the magnificent stone entrance where valets in crisp uniforms waited to assist guests from luxury vehicles. Not exactly. Stepping out of my Uber amid a sea of arriving Mercedes and BMWs, I immediately felt the stark contrast between my world and this one. The valets looked briefly confused about whether to help me, clearly distinguishing guests who belonged from those who didn't. I straightened my shoulders and walked toward the entrance, with forced confidence. My parents stood in the reception area, my mother frantically waving when she spotted me. Alexandra. Finally. The ceremony starts in 20 minutes, she hissed, as though my precisely on-time arrival was somehow tardy. Her eyes darted around me. Where's your date? I thought you might have reconnected with someone while getting ready. Mom, I told you I'm coming alone, I said, keeping my voice level. It's fine. My father gave me an encouraging wink behind my mother's back. Well, I suppose it's too late now, she sighed, adjusting my hair slightly. Just try to blend in. Before I could respond, Timothy's mother Constance approached our small group, impeccably dressed in a designer suit that probably cost more than 6 months of my salary. Evelyn, David, so lovely to see you, she said warmly before turning her calculating gaze to me. And you must be Alexandra. We've heard so much about your charity work. The way she said charity work made it sound like I handed out soup at a local shelter once a month rather than coordinated life-saving operations in war zones. International humanitarian aid, yes, I clarified with a polite smile. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Blackwell. Constance, please, she replied, her eyes conducting a comprehensive inventory of my appearance. How interesting that you could make it. Timothy mentioned you're rarely in the country. I wouldn't miss my sister's wedding, I said simply. Of course not. Well, do enjoy the ceremony. We've spared no expense to make it perfect for the happy couple. With that thinly veiled reminder of their wealth, she glided away to greet more important guests. I made my way into the ceremony space, an elegant garden area with rows of white chairs facing an elaborate floral arch. As I looked for a seat, I noticed Timothy's cousins, whom I'd briefly met at the engagement party, strategically placing purses and programs on empty chairs near them as I approached. Sorry, these are saved, a blonde woman in a pink dress said without making eye contact. I nodded and continued down the row, eventually finding a seat near the back, despite being immediate family of the bride. As I sat down, I couldn't help remembering the disastrous Christmas dinner 6 months ago, the only other time I'd met Timothy's extended family. Timothy's sister Melissa had cornered me by the dessert table, champagne glass in hand. So, Alexandra, Tim says you work in Africa, or something. What's the point, really? Don't those countries just waste all the aid money anyway? I tried to explain the complexity of international development work, the importance of local partnerships, the real impact we made, but her glazed expression made it clear she wasn't listening. Later, I overheard her telling her friends I was one of those bleeding hearts who thinks they're saving the world. A tap on my shoulder brought me back to the present. Samantha stood there in her wedding day finery, looking nervous. You came, she said, sounding surprised. Of course I came. You look beautiful, Sam. And she did, though the elaborate dress seemed to overwhelm her petite frame. Thanks. She glanced at my outfit with a slight frown. Is that what you decided to wear? It's so simple. I swallowed the hurt. I thought it was elegant. It's fine, she said quickly. Just try not to draw attention, okay? Timothy's family is really big on appearances. I've noticed, I replied dryly. Samantha gave me a pleading look. Please, Alex. Just for today, can you try to fit in? For me. Before I could answer, her wedding planner whisked her away for final preparations. I sat back in my chair, feeling increasingly out of place. From nearby, I overheard Timothy's father Robert holding court with several guests. Timothy's new sister-in-law, he was saying in response to someone's question. Oh, she's the black sheep. Lives in tents in God knows where, doing some kind of relief work. Never married, no children. Samantha's the practical one in that family, thankfully. I stared straight ahead, pretending not to hear as laughter followed his assessment of my life choices. One of the bridesmaids, Brittany, spotted me sitting alone and came over with what appeared to be friendly intentions. Alexandra, right? I've heard so much about you, she gushed, sitting beside me temporarily. Good things, I hope, I replied cautiously. Of course. Your humanitarian work sounds so adventurous. I donated to a charity run once. She leaned closer. But honestly, don't you get tired of all that depressing poverty? And the dating options must be abysmal. Actually, I find the work incredibly fulfilling. I began, and my colleagues are some of the most dedicated, passionate people I've. Oh, sure, she interrupted, patting my arm condescendingly. It's so noble. Really. We need people willing to make those sacrifices. She emphasized the last word while glancing pointedly at my practical hairstyle and minimal makeup. After Brittany returned to the bridal party, I retreated further into myself, questioning whether I belonged here at all. The contrast between the lavish surroundings and the refugee camp I'd left just days ago felt surreal. There, every resource was precious. Here, excess was the point. I closed my eyes briefly, remembering a young girl I'd helped evacuate during an artillery bombardment 3 months ago. Her quiet courage as I carried her through dangerous streets put this entire display of wealth and social posturing into perspective. Mind if I join you? I opened my eyes to find an elderly woman with kind eyes gesturing to the seat beside me. Not at all, I replied, grateful for the company. I'm Eleanor, Timothy's grandmother, she introduced herself. You must be Samantha's sister. Alexandra, I confirmed, bracing for more judgment. To my surprise, she smiled warmly. Timothy mentioned you work in humanitarian aid. My late husband was with the Red Cross for 40 years. Started after serving in Korea. For the first time since arriving, I felt a genuine connection. Really? That's incredible. The Red Cross does amazing work. He would have loved to talk with you, she said wistfully. Most of this crowd doesn't understand a life of service. As we chatted, I noticed a distinguished-looking man in his 60s observing our conversation from several rows ahead. Unlike the dismissive glances I'd received from others, his gaze held genuine curiosity. Our conversation ended as Eleanor was called away by family, and Timothy approached me directly for the first time that day. Alexandra, he acknowledged stiffly. Glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it, I replied, waiting for him to continue the conversation. After an awkward pause, he simply nodded.
Well,
Better finish getting ready. And with that, he walked away, having fulfilled what he clearly considered an obligation. As guests continued arriving, I checked the seating chart for the reception and found my name misspelled as Alexandria and placed at a table far from my family, with elderly distant relatives and what appeared to be Timothy's former babysitter. While contemplating this final indignity, I noticed one of the catering staff glancing at my phone as I checked messages from my team. Is that the International Relief Alliance logo? She asked quietly. I nodded, surprised by her recognition. My brother was in that earthquake in Indonesia last year. Said IRA workers were the only ones who reached their village in the first week. She gave me a genuine smile. Thank you for what you do. Her simple acknowledgement provided a moment of validation amid the afternoon's subtle humiliations. But as the wedding coordinator began directing guests to their seats for the ceremony, I steeled myself for several more hours of feeling like an unwelcome outsider in my sister's new world. The ceremony itself was a masterclass in extravagance. 20,000 white roses imported from Ecuador. A string quartet playing classical arrangements. Crystal chandeliers somehow suspended from tree branches. It was beautiful in the same overwhelming way as a museum display, meant to be admired rather than felt. As Samantha walked down the aisle on our father's arm, I felt a complicated surge of emotions. Pride and love for my sister, certainly, but also sadness at how far apart our lives had grown. When had we stopped understanding each other? Once, we'd been inseparable allies against the world. The minister began with a traditional service that emphasized the joining of two families. Timothy's brother gave a reading about the sacred bonds of traditional marriage building society's foundation, his eyes deliberately sweeping over me when he mentioned the importance of continuing family legacies through children. The implication was clear. My childless, unmarried state was somehow a failure. As the ceremony continued, my mind drifted to a field hospital I'd helped establish in northern Syria last year. We'd worked 3 days without sleep to treat civilians caught in crossfire. In those critical moments, with lives literally in our hands, I'd found a purpose and clarity that nothing in my previous comfortable American life had provided. The memory centered me, reminding me that disapproval from people who'd never faced such realities couldn't diminish the value of my choices. After Samantha and Timothy were pronounced husband and wife, the photographer began arranging family portraits. I stepped forward to join my parents for the family shots, only to have the photographer suggest, perhaps Alexandra could step out of a few of these? Let's get some with just the parents and the couple first. I retreated, watching as various configurations of Timothy's extensive family were carefully documented. When finally included for a few obligatory shots, the photographer positioned me at the edge, where I could easily be cropped out later. The cocktail hour that followed was held on a terrace overlooking manicured gardens. I stood alone near a stone balustrade, nursing a glass of champagne and discreetly checking messages from my field partner about a developing situation at our latest project site. A group of children had arrived without parents, needing immediate assistance. I wished desperately I could be there, doing actual meaningful work, rather than enduring this elaborate social performance. From nearby, Timothy's Uncle Jackson held court with several attentive listeners. The problem with international aid, he proclaimed loudly enough for me to hear, is distinguishing between useful careers and wasteful ones. Building businesses creates real prosperity. Handouts just create dependency. His companions nodded sagely, several glancing in my direction to ensure I'd overheard this wisdom. I took another sip of champagne, reminding myself that engaging would only create drama on Samantha's special day. Still, the dismissal of life-saving work as handouts made my blood boil. Moving toward the bar for a refill, I passed a group of Timothy's female relatives who broke into poorly concealed laughter as I walked by. "Did you see her shoes?" one whispered. "So practical." "Well, what can you expect? Not everyone can afford Louboutins," another replied with mock sympathy, looking pointedly at my sensible low heels, the only dressy shoes I owned that wouldn't leave me in pain after years of foot injuries in the field. At the bar, I encountered Timothy's cousin Grace, a woman about my age with a perpetually bored expression. "Alexandra, right? Samantha's sister?" she asked, though she knew perfectly well who I was. "Are you still playing Mother Teresa in Africa or wherever?" "I coordinate emergency medical services in conflict zones throughout the Middle East and North Africa," I corrected calmly. She yawned dramatically. "Sounds exhausting. And no husband or kids to come home to. What's your endgame exactly?" "Helping people survive wars they didn't choose isn't really about personal endgames," I replied. "So noble," she said with the same condescending tone Brittany had used earlier. "Some of us prefer making a difference through supporting our husbands' careers and raising the next generation, but to each their own." I bit back a response about the many mothers in refugee camps doing both under impossible circumstances. Instead, I ordered a whiskey neat, abandoning the champagne for something stronger. As Grace sauntered away, I overheard Constance talking to her friends just behind me. "We try to support Samantha despite her family background," she was saying in a stage whisper. "They're nice people, just not accustomed to our social circle. The sister is especially, well, you can see for yourself. Such unusual priorities." The bartender caught my eye as he handed me my drink. "Family stuff, huh?" he said quietly. "Is it that obvious?" He shrugged. "Worked hundreds of these fancy weddings. Can always spot the family member getting the cold shoulder. For what it's worth, they usually seem like the most interesting person in the room." His small kindness was a welcome respite. As I turned from the bar, I noticed an old family friend, Dr. Roberts, approaching with a genuine smile. "Alexandra, wonderful to see you. It's been years." He gave me a warm hug. "Your mother tells me you're doing incredible work overseas. I'd love to hear about it if you don't mind sharing." For the next 10 minutes, I had my first real conversation of the day, describing some of our recent medical initiatives and the challenges of providing care in unstable regions.
Dr.
Roberts asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely impressed by the complexity of the work. Our conversation was interrupted by my phone vibrating with an urgent message. A situation was developing at the camp. The unaccompanied children needed emergency medical attention, and my team was seeking guidance on protocols. I desperately wanted to step away and handle this actual life-or-death situation, but knew doing so at Samantha's wedding would only confirm everyone's worst opinions about my priorities. As I reluctantly tucked my phone away, resolving to check it discreetly later, I noticed the same distinguished older gentleman from earlier watching me with interest. He approached as Dr. Roberts was called away by his wife. "I couldn't help overhearing parts of your conversation," he said, extending his hand. "Richard Montgomery. I'm Timothy's uncle on his mother's side." "Alexandra Taylor," I replied, shaking his hand firmly. "Samantha's sister." "I gathered that," he said with a slight smile. "I understand you work in international relief efforts?" "Yes, with the International Relief Alliance." "Fascinating field. I'm an international business myself, import-export primarily, though I've worked with several NGOs over the years on logistics issues." Something about his specific interest and knowledge seemed unusual compared to the vague dismissiveness I'd encountered from others. Before I could probe further, the wedding coordinator announced it was time to move to the reception hall. As I followed the crowd inside, I sensed this wedding was about to become even more challenging. The worst part was knowing that Samantha had once been my closest ally, but today she seemed to have fully embraced her new family's values and their judgment of me. The reception entrance was orchestrated with theatrical precision. The DJ announced each member of the wedding party with their escort, each couple emerging through giant floral arrangements to applause. My parents were announced together, looking uncomfortable but pleased with the attention. And finally, Alexandra Taylor, sister of the bride, the DJ announced as I walked in alone. The applause noticeably thinned. Several guests whispered to each other, and I caught pitying glances as I made my way across the ballroom floor without a partner. Timothy's teenage cousin snickered audibly, receiving a half-hearted shushing from his mother. Following the escort cards, I found my assigned table tucked in a far corner of the room, effectively out of sight from the main party. My tablemates included Timothy's great-aunt Mildred, who was hard of hearing, two ancient cousins who fell asleep between courses, and the family's former gardener, who'd been invited out of obligation. We were the island of misfit guests, clearly segregated from the celebration's inner circle. During dinner, Melissa, Timothy's sister, gave a maid of honor speech filled with subtle digs disguised as jokes. As we welcomed Samantha to our family, she concluded with a meaningful glance in my direction. We're so glad she understands the importance of contributing to society through business and family values, not just through well-intentioned but ultimately temporary handouts. Several guests nodded approvingly while looking my way, making sure I understood the comment was directed at my career choice. When the dance floor opened after dinner, my mother appeared at my table, visibly distressed by my isolation. Alexandra, darling, Samantha's father-in-law knows a lovely single man here, a banker friend of Robert's. He's at table 9. Why don't I introduce you? Mom, I'm not interested in being set up at my sister's wedding, I said firmly. But you look so lonely sitting here. Everyone else is dancing.
Ai fine.
Really? She sighed dramatically. I just don't understand why you make things so difficult for yourself. Would it kill you to wear some lipstick? Maybe style your hair more femininely? Constance mentioned her hairdresser could fit you in tomorrow if you wanted to try something more flattering. Before I could respond to this fresh critique, Constance herself materialized beside us, champagne glass in hand, clearly having overheard. Alexandra, dear, I was just telling the Hendersons about Samantha's sister. You know, she could be quite pretty if she tried. She addressed this to my mother, as if I weren't present. With the right makeup and clothes, perhaps a more feminine hairstyle? I excused myself to use the restroom, needing a moment of privacy. Unfortunately, the ladies' room provided no sanctuary. As I entered a stall, Brittany and another bridesmaid came in, unaware of my presence. Can you believe Alexandra? Brittany was saying. The way she talks about her job like she's some kind of savior. So self-righteous. I know. And did you see that dress? So plain. She's not even trying. Samantha says she's always been difficult. Can you imagine choosing to live like that? No wonder she's alone. Their words shouldn't have hurt after years of dealing with much worse circumstances, but family events had a way of reducing me to adolescent vulnerability. I waited until they left before emerging, splashing cold water on my face and giving myself a stern pep talk in the mirror. As I stared at my reflection, I remembered the evacuation mission last year that had earned me a commendation from the military units we'd coordinated with. Thousands of civilians safely relocated during active conflict. Our team had worked without sleep for 72 hours straight, making life-or-death decisions every minute. The commanding officer had personally thanked me for extraordinary courage under fire and exceptional leadership. That woman, the one who led teams through war zones and negotiated with military commanders, seemed impossibly distant from the unwanted sister being humiliated at a country club wedding. Returning to the reception with renewed determination to endure the evening gracefully, I was stopped by the wedding planner, who looked at me with confusion. Excuse me. The vendor area is through the service entrance. Catering staff shouldn't use the main bathrooms. I'm not staff, I corrected her. I'm the bride's sister. Her expression shifted to embarrassment, mixed with surprise.
Oh. I'm so sorry.
It's just your dress, I assumed. Even the professionals couldn't imagine I belonged with a crystal-draped, designer-clothed crowd. As the evening progressed, I noticed a group of Timothy's business friends creating what appeared to be a drinking game centered around my single status. Each time I declined a dance or sat alone, they would drink and laugh, making little effort to hide their amusement at my expense. The pinnacle of humiliation came during dinner, when Melissa clinked her glass to make an unscheduled announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've just had the most wonderful idea." Her voice carried through the professionally designed sound system. "Our beautiful bride has her perfect match, but we've neglected her sister Alexandra." My stomach dropped as heads turned toward my corner table. Alexandra has traveled all the way from... where was it again? Somalia? Iraq? Anyway, she's here all alone, and that simply won't do. Thomas Winthrop is also here without a date tonight, and he's one of Boston's most eligible bachelors. "Thomas, where are you?" A visibly uncomfortable man in his 40s half raised his hand from a nearby table. "Perfect," Melissa continued, gesturing dramatically. "Could we have Alexandra and Thomas come to the center of the dance floor for a special introduction? Everyone deserves to find their special someone." The spotlight literally swung to illuminate me in my corner, then moved to Thomas, then back to me. The DJ, taking Melissa's cue, announced over the microphone, "Let's help the lonely sister find love. Everyone, Alexandra and Thomas to the dance floor, please." 100 pairs of eyes fixed on me expectantly. Samantha looked mortified but made no move to intervene. My parents appeared frozen in embarrassed silence. I remained seated, blood rushing in my ears, unsure whether to storm out or endure this public matchmaking spectacle. My fight-or-flight response, honed through actual life-threatening situations, had never been tested quite like this. From across the room, I noticed Richard Montgomery watching the scene unfold, his expression shifting from observation to what appeared to be recognition and then respect. As the uncomfortable silence stretched and Melissa's smile became strained, I stood up, intending to quietly exit to the terrace for air. My legs felt unsteady as I navigated between tables, feeling the weight of judgment with each step. Outside, in the cool evening air, I gripped the stone balustrade, fighting back tears of anger and humiliation. My phone buzzed again. The situation with the refugee children was escalating. They needed decisions only I could make, but I was stuck at this ridiculous display of excess, being publicly humiliated for the crime of being unmarried at 32. I pulled out my phone and called my closest colleague, Martin. "Alexandra? Aren't you at your sister's wedding?" he answered, sounding surprised. "Yes, but I needed to hear a friendly voice," I admitted, my voice unsteady. "What's happening with those children?" "We're managing for now. Dr. Patel implemented the emergency protocols you developed last year."
His tone softened.
"Are you okay? You sound upset." "Just family stuff," I said, attempting lightness. "Makes me miss the simplicity of coordinating emergency evacuations under artillery fire." "That bad, huh?" Martin chuckled. "Remember what you always tell the new recruits. Your worth isn't determined by people who couldn't do your job for a day." Hearing my own words reflected back to me helped restore my perspective. "Thanks, Martin. I needed that reminder." As I ended the call and prepared to return to the reception for Samantha's sake, I turned to find Richard Montgomery standing quietly nearby, offering me a glass of water rather than champagne. "I thought you might prefer this to alcohol," Richard said, extending the water glass. "Clear heads are useful in difficult situations." I accepted gratefully, studying him more carefully. Unlike the other guests who'd approached me with curiosity as if I were an exotic specimen, his interests seemed different, more professional than social. "Thank you. I was just getting some air." Understandable. Large social gatherings can be overwhelming, especially when you're recently back from field operations. The specificity of his comment caught my attention. "How did you know I was recently in the field?" "The tan lines around your eyes suggest recent extended time outdoors in bright conditions. Your hyper-awareness of exit routes and strategic positioning with your back to walls are consistent with security training." And you check your phone with the urgency of someone with ongoing operational responsibilities. His observations were delivered matter-of-factly. Plus, I overheard parts of your phone conversation just now. You're very observant, Mr. Montgomery. Richard, please. And observation is an essential skill in my line of work. Which is what, exactly? You mentioned international business earlier. He smiled slightly. That's the simplest explanation for social gatherings like this. My actual position is a bit more complex. I serve as UN Special Envoy for Refugee Affairs, focusing on coordination between humanitarian organizations and security operations in conflict zones. The revelation surprised me. That's not what I expected from Timothy's uncle. I'm technically his great-uncle, his grandmother's younger brother. The family tends to simplify my work as import-export business because it's easier for them to understand. He sipped his own water. But I'm not here to discuss my work. I believe you're Captain Alexander Taylor, who led the Baghlan province evacuation during the artillery bombardment last April. My surprise must have shown on my face because he continued. I was reviewing reports on that operation just yesterday. Extraordinary work, 600 civilians evacuated through active conflict zones with no casualties. The military commanders spoke very highly of your leadership under pressure. How do you know about that? I asked, genuinely shocked to hear this operation mentioned at a wedding in Boston. It's part of my job to know about successful civilian-military cooperation models. Your evacuation protocol is being studied as a case example for future operations. He set his glass down on the balustrade. What most people in that ballroom don't understand is that individuals like you save more lives in a month than most people impact in a lifetime. For a moment, I couldn't speak. After a day of dismissal and humiliation, being recognized for my actual work was overwhelming. My son was in Kabul 3 years ago, Richard continued quietly. Foreign Service officer, caught in an embassy attack. A humanitarian team much like yours coordinated with military forces to extract civilians. He was among those saved. I'm glad he made it out, I said sincerely.
So am I.
He has 2 children now. Richard's eyes reflected genuine emotion. When I read your name in the wedding program, I thought it might be you. Your reputation in certain circles is quite distinguished, Captain Taylor. Our conversation had drawn the attention of nearby guests who began to listen with increasing interest. I noticed Timothy's parents watching us with confusion, clearly wondering why Richard was giving me such focused attention. Would you mind returning inside with me? Richard asked. I believe there's something that needs to be addressed. Though uncertain of his intentions, I nodded and followed him back into the reception hall where Melissa's failed matchmaking attempt had been awkwardly abandoned. The party had resumed, though many guests still shot curious glances my way. Richard walked purposefully toward the band and spoke briefly with the bandleader, who handed him a microphone. The music faded as Richard moved to the center of the dance floor. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention for a moment? His authoritative voice immediately quieted the room. For those who don't know me, I'm Richard Montgomery, Timothy's great-uncle. While most of you know me from family gatherings, some of you are aware that my work with the United Nations takes me to some of the world's most troubled regions. The room fell completely silent, guests exchanging confused glances about this unexpected speech. Earlier today, I had the unexpected honor of recognizing someone whose work has saved countless lives in these same regions. Someone whose courage and leadership are legendary among those who understand the realities of conflict zones. My heart began beating faster as I realized where this was going. Many of you have met Alexander Taylor today as simply Samantha's sister. What you may not know is that Captain Taylor has led some of the most successful civilian evacuation operations in recent military history. Murmurs spread through the crowd as all eyes turned to me. Last April, Captain Taylor coordinated the evacuation of 600 civilians during active artillery bombardment, creating safe corridors where military experts believed none were possible. Her protocols for protecting vulnerable populations during conflict are currently being adopted as best practices by the United Nations. The expressions around the room transformed from confusion to shock. Constance's mouth literally hung open. Melissa stood frozen beside the cake table. In my 40 years of international service, I have rarely encountered the level of courage, tactical brilliance, and humanitarian commitment that Alexandra demonstrates in her daily work. Richard then did something completely unexpected. He turned directly to face me, and with the formal dignity of his diplomatic position, executed a respectful bow. On behalf of those who understand the true value of your service, Captain Taylor, I thank you for your extraordinary work saving lives that the world has too often forgotten. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Then, from the back, Timothy's grandmother Eleanor began to applaud. Slowly, others joined, the applause building as the reality of Richard's words sank in. I stood immobile, completely unprepared for this public recognition. Samantha stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, surprise mixed with something that might have been newfound respect. Richard returned the microphone to the band and approached me again. I hope I haven't embarrassed you, he said quietly, but I believe in giving credit where it's genuinely due. Thank you. I managed, still processing what had just happened. That was unexpected. Truth often is, especially in settings like this. He gestured around at the elaborate reception. Now, there are several people I'd like you to meet, colleagues who would value your expertise. As Richard guided me toward a small group of distinguished-looking guests, I noticed a remarkable shift in the room's dynamics. Constance was attempting to join our conversation, suddenly eager to claim connection to me. Alexandra has always been so dedicated to her important work, she gushed to Richard's colleagues. We've supported her humanitarian efforts for years, haven't we, Robert? Timothy's father nodded vigorously, contradicting his earlier dismissive comments. Absolutely. Extraordinary work she does. We're very proud to welcome her family into ours. The transformation was both amusing and disheartening. Their respect was not for me as a person, but for the status Richard's recognition had unexpectedly conferred. As I was introduced to actual diplomats and humanitarian directors attending the wedding, I began to understand that Richard had carefully orchestrated this moment not just to recognize me, but to completely reshape how I was perceived in this social context. My phone buzzed again with urgent messages about the refugee children. This time, instead of hiding my responsibilities, I excused myself professionally. I apologize, but I have an urgent situation developing at one of our camps. Would you mind if I took a few minutes to address this? Richard immediately understood. Of course. Use the library through those doors for privacy. As I stepped away to handle the actual life-or-death decisions that constituted my normal workday, I realized something profound had shifted. For the first time since arriving at this wedding, I was being seen for who I actually was, not who this family thought I should be. When I returned from handling the refugee crisis situation 15 minutes later, the atmosphere in the ballroom had transformed remarkably. Guests who had previously avoided me now maneuvered to introduce themselves. Constance hovered nearby, clearly eager to reclaim me as someone suddenly worth acknowledging. Alexandra, darling, she said, linking her arm through mine as if we were old friends. I was just telling the Vandermeers about your important humanitarian work. So fascinating. We must have you speak at our charity gala next month. The abrupt shift from dismissal to exploitation was jarring. I gently disengaged my arm. Thank you for the interest, Constance. If you'll excuse me, I should check on Samantha. My sister stood with Timothy near the cake display, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. As I approached, she stepped forward and embraced me tightly. Why didn't you ever tell me? She whispered. Tell you what? About what you really do. The evacuations, the protocols, all of it. You always just said medical coordination like you were doing paperwork. I pulled back to look at her. Would it have mattered? The question hung between us, both of us knowing that until Richard's intervention, my work had been dismissed as misguided charity rather than respected as skilled crisis management. I'm sorry, she said finally. I should have stood up for you earlier. When Melissa was being horrible. It's your wedding day, I said gently. You shouldn't have to worry about defending me. Timothy approached awkwardly. Alexandra, I had no idea about your work. It sounds quite impressive. Thank you, I replied, noting his discomfort. I've always supported international humanitarian efforts, he added unconvincingly. Perhaps the Family Foundation could contribute to your organization. The transparent attempt to retroactively position himself on the right side of history might have annoyed me earlier, but now it simply seemed pathetic. That's generous. Your foundation should contact our development office directly. My professional tone made it clear I wasn't personally seeking his approval. Across the room, I noticed Melissa making a beeline toward me, her expression an uncomfortable mixture of embarrassment and calculation. Before she reached us, Richard intercepted her with a diplomatic maneuver that left her stranded in conversation with an elderly couple. Samantha squeezed my hand. I need to circulate, but we'll talk more later, okay? I want to hear everything about your work. The real version. As she returned her bridal duties, I found myself momentarily alone on the edge of the dance floor. The room's energy had shifted dramatically. Where before I'd felt isolated and judged, now I stood confidently, no longer seeking approval from people whose values were so different from my own. I decided to embrace the moment fully. When the band played a popular song, I stepped onto the dance floor alone, moving confidently to the music without a partner. A few months ago in Sudan, our entire team had danced to this same song after successfully completing a difficult medical transport. The memory brought a genuine smile to my face. Several guests watched with surprise as I danced alone, completely comfortable in my solitude. A few women hesitantly joined me, forming a small impromptu group of female dancers. The simple act of claiming space without apology felt like its own small revolution. When I eventually returned to the edge of the dance floor, Timothy's father Robert appeared beside me, champagne glass in hand. Alexandra, I feel we should get better acquainted, now that our families are joined. His tone was overly jovial. Richard tells me your organization handles complex logistical operations. Very impressive. My company has extensive shipping interests that might align with your humanitarian concerns. We always welcome corporate partnerships that align with our humanitarian mission, I replied neutrally. Excellent, excellent. I should introduce you to our logistics director. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting next week before you return to wherever it is you're stationed. I'm afraid I'm flying out tomorrow night. There's an urgent situation requiring my presence. So soon? But surely that could be delegated to someone else? Family should come first. The irony of this statement after a day of being treated as an embarrassing outsider wasn't lost on me. In my line of work, Mr. Blackwell, delayed decisions cost lives. My team is managing a group of unaccompanied children who need immediate intervention. I see. He clearly didn't. Well, perhaps we could speak by phone then. Your office can contact our partnerships team directly. I handed him a business card I kept in my clutch for professional emergencies. They'll direct you to the appropriate department. As Robert walked away, looking slightly rebuffed by my failure to be appropriately grateful for his sudden interest, I noticed a man about my age watching our interaction with a barely concealed smile. Robert Blackwell doesn't hear, not now very often, he commented as he approached.
I'm Dr. Michael Harris.
I work with Richard on the UN Medical Advisory Committee. Alexander Taylor. I replied, shaking his hand. I know. Your work in Baghlan province last year quite literally rewrote our emergency evacuation protocols. His admiration seemed genuine rather than opportunistic. I've been hoping to meet you for months, though I never expected it would be at a wedding. For the first time that day, I found myself in conversation with someone who understood my world, the challenges, the ethical dilemmas, the technical complexities of humanitarian work in conflict zones. Michael asked thoughtful questions about our medical transport systems and shared insights from his own field experiences in Ukraine. As we talked, I noticed Melissa hovering nearby, clearly waiting for an opportunity to approach. When she finally did, her usual confidence had been replaced by an awkward, ingratiating manner. Alexandra, I just wanted to apologize for earlier. The whole matchmaking thing was clearly inappropriate. If I'd known about your important work. The conditional nature of her apology, based not on recognizing her behavior was wrong, but on my newly discovered status, deserved addressing. Melissa, I said calmly. Treating someone with dignity shouldn't depend on their resume. The issue wasn't that you didn't know what I do for a living. It was that you decided my value as a person was determined by my relationship status. Her expression froze, and used to being directly confronted. I was just trying to help, she stammered. No, you were trying to publicly establish your social superiority. I corrected her gently. But I accept your apology, and I hope we can move forward with greater mutual respect. Michael watched this exchange with quiet approval as Melissa retreated, chastened in a way she'd likely rarely experienced. That was masterfully handled, he commented. Firm but not unkind. Years of negotiating with military commanders and local officials teaches you to be diplomatic but direct, I replied with a small smile. As the evening continued, I found myself engaged in genuine conversations rather than enduring judgment. When the time came for Samantha and Timothy's final dance, my sister sought me out. Save me a breakfast spot tomorrow, she asked, hugging me tightly. I want to hear everything about your work before we leave for our honeymoon. Of course, I promised, returning her embrace. Thank you for handling today with such grace, she whispered. I'm sorry it took Uncle Richard's speech for everyone to see how amazing you are. As Samantha rejoined Timothy for their send-off, I reflected on how differently the day had unfolded from my expectations. What began as an exercise in endurance had transformed into an unexpected moment of professional recognition and personal growth. Richard approached as guests began departing. I hope my intervention wasn't overstepping. It was unexpected, I admitted. But I appreciate it, though I'm curious why you felt it necessary. In my experience, people who do the most meaningful work often receive the least recognition, while those who contribute little demand the most praise. He glanced meaningfully toward Robert and Constance, who were now boasting to friends about their daughter-in-law's heroic sister. I've never needed public validation for my work, I said. Precisely why you deserved it, Richard replied. Before you leave, take my card. The UN has a position opening that would benefit from your expertise, should you ever consider a change. As guests filed out and the evening wound down, Michael approached again. Some of us are continuing discussions over coffee tomorrow morning about the refugee situation you're managing. Would you consider joining us? Your frontline perspective would be invaluable. For the first time that day, an invitation was extended based on genuine interest rather than obligation or newfound social calculation. I accepted gladly, realizing that amid this unexpected social battlefield, I'd found allies I never anticipated. 3 weeks later, I sat in a makeshift office tent in Jordan, coordinating medical supplies for the refugee children who had arrived during the wedding. The crisis had been successfully managed. All 56 children had received necessary care and were being processed for family reunification where possible. My laptop chimed with an incoming video call from Samantha. Her tanned face filled the screen, the beaches of Bali visible in the background. Alex, can you hear me? The internet here is spotty. I can hear you fine, I replied, smiling at her obvious relaxation. How's the honeymoon? Amazing. But I want to hear about you. Are those children okay? The ones you were worried about during the reception? The genuine interest in her voice was new. Before the wedding, our conversations had rarely touched on the specifics of my work. They're doing well. All received medical treatment, and we've already located family members for almost half of them. That's incredible. She leaned closer to the camera. I still can't believe I never really understood what you do. All these years, I thought you were just, I don't know, handing out blankets and food parcels? I suggested with a smile. She looked embarrassed. Something like that. I'm sorry, Alex. I should have asked more questions, shown more interest. We both could have communicated better, I acknowledged. It's easy to fall into family patterns where everyone has assigned roles. Our conversation continued for nearly an hour, the longest, most meaningful exchange we'd had in years. Samantha asked detailed questions about my work, and I found myself sharing stories I'd previously kept to myself, assuming no one in my family would be interested. After our call, I checked my email to find a formal letter from Richard Montgomery, offering support and resources for our current refugee initiative. His foundation was prepared to fund additional medical personnel and supplies, specifically citing my leadership as the reason for their confidence in the project. The wedding that I dreaded had unexpectedly opened doors I never anticipated. Richard's public recognition had triggered interest from several organizations that could significantly expand our capacity to help vulnerable populations. More personally, the experience had forced me to confront my own insecurities about my life choices. For years, I'd carried a small, hidden doubt. Was I doing meaningful work, or just running from conventional expectations? The wedding had painfully exposed that doubt, but ultimately helped resolve it. 2 months later, I took a brief leave to attend a humanitarian conference in New York. Samantha and Timothy invited me to dinner at their new home. To my surprise, Constance and Robert were also present, their attitude toward me completely transformed. Alexandra, we've made your humanitarian organization the focus of our foundation's annual gala, Constance announced proudly. Robert has been telling everyone about his heroic sister-in-law. I caught Samantha's eye across the table, and we shared a knowing look at this dramatic revision of history. Rather than calling out the hypocrisy, I simply thanked them for their support, recognizing that their influence, however newly acquired, could genuinely benefit the communities we served. During that same trip, I met with Michael Harris again. Our professional conversations had continued over email since the wedding, evolving into a friendship based on mutual respect and shared values. Over coffee, he shared news about his upcoming deployment to establish a new medical program in Lebanon. "We could use someone with your experience," he mentioned, "if you're ever interested in joining forces." The possibility of collaboration with someone who understood both the technical demands and ethical complexities of the work was appealing. For so long, I'd compartmentalized my professional and personal lives, assuming they could never meaningfully intersect. 6 months after the wedding that had begun with humiliation, I stood on a stage accepting a humanitarian leadership award, my parents and Samantha in the audience. Richard had nominated me for the recognition, citing specific innovations in crisis response that had saved countless lives. As I gave my acceptance speech, I spotted Constance and Robert in the crowd, now eagerly identifying themselves as family supporters. Their approval no longer mattered to me personally, but their resources could benefit our work, so I acknowledged them graciously. More meaningful was the presence of my sister, who had recently visited one of our less dangerous project sites to volunteer for 2 weeks. The experience had profoundly affected her, challenging her previous priorities and assumptions. I never understood before, she had told me during her visit, watching children play in a safe zone we'd established. Their resilience, your team's dedication, it's nothing like what I imagined. Christmas brought another family gathering, but with a transformed dynamic. Instead of defending my choices or deflecting questions about marriage, I found myself leading conversations about global issues that mattered. Even more surprisingly, people were listening. The following spring, I accepted a joint position with the UN initiative Richard had mentioned, allowing me to continue field work while helping develop international protocols based on our successful models. The role would eventually lead to greater impact than I could achieve in my previous position alone. When Michael and I departed for a joint mission to establish a new medical evacuation system, it was with the full support of my family, something I couldn't have imagined before the wedding incident, as we now jokingly called it. The journey from feeling like an outsider in my own family to finding confidence in my chosen path hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. I no longer measured my worth against conventional standards that never truly mattered to me. Standing in our new field hospital 6 months later, watching local medical staff we'd trained successfully manage their first major influx of patients, I felt a profound sense of purpose. My life might not follow the traditional path my family once expected, but its value was undeniable, both to me and to those whose lives were touched by our work. That night, I video called Samantha, who immediately noticed my expression.
"You look happy," she observed.
"I am," I replied simply. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Have you ever had a moment when someone finally saw your true value after years of being misunderstood? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more stories about finding your authentic path, even when it doesn't match others' expectations. And don't forget to share this with someone who might need the reminder that their worth isn't determined by societal expectations. Thank you for listening to my journey. May you find the courage to embrace yours, whatever form it takes.